Antony, Naomi, you have the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be hosting this fireside chat. It's going to be a really exciting one. Welcome, Antony. I'm absolutely thrilled to be chatting with you in this segment. We're going to be talking about the strategy of freedom. Of course, everyone knows Antony who's watching this stream, but for those of you who've tuned in who may not, he is the manager of technical operations at Bitcoin ABC, a wealth of knowledge on all things. And today we're going to be focused on talking about political economy, game theory, and strategies of freedom. So welcome.
Hi, thanks, Naomi. Yeah, I was thinking, like, I didn't know if you wanted me to start, like, giving a bit of my backstory, or if I should just get into.
Absolutely. I mean, your philosophy really grounds a lot of the work you do in Bitcoin Cash development, and so it's probably good just to give an overview of
Sure.
that. We've discussed it a little bit before we started the stream, but just to give people an overview of your philosophical ideology, and then we can kind of go into how
Sure.
that affects your work.
Sure. Like, basically, like, my online handle is Mengarian, so people can probably guess based on that I'm like interested in economics and stuff. I was named after Carl Menger. So yeah, like, basically my background with Bitcoin was I got really interested in economics and libertarian theory back in like 2008, 2009 after that financial crisis, and I got into, like, it's actually interesting. I noticed Jeffrey Tucker is coming up in 2 segments, so like I have, like, you know, I got into, like, the Mises Institute and his books and various books he recommended and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I was basically into, like, gold and silver and economics and all that kind of stuff. So then when I found out about Bitcoin, my other background was I was an electrical engineer by schooling. So kind of understand technology to some degree, although I'm not really a programmer, but I can understand enough of it to know what's going on. So yeah, so that basically got me into Bitcoin. And yeah, so basically, like, I'm coming at it from like an ideological angle. Like, that was what interested me in it in the first place, like, in terms of, like, gold, silver, hard money. And then I thought, okay, this is like an even better form of money that could potentially, like, you know, be something that could, like, advance liberty in the world and so on. So that
For sure. No, I think that it's so exciting because we finally have a choice in money. And when we're talking about strategies of freedom, cryptocurrency has finally given us a choice. You know, people have tried to have competing currencies for a long time, and they've just been shut down case after case by governments around the world. And then Bitcoin was created, and it was the first money that couldn't be shut down. And now we have a swath of cryptocurrencies that are giving people choice in money. And one of the principles that I want to focus on, especially in your ideology, is this kind of trade-off between pragmatism and principles, and whether there is a trade-off. So this is something that harkens back to what you're talking about in terms of your libertarian ideology and what's going on in politics at the moment. Did you want to elaborate a little bit on that and then talk about that trade-off?
Totally. Well, I guess what I'm, like, the thing is, I don't know where to start, sorry.
It's a giant topic. And so, I mean, you can talk about it. Let's just kind of a brief overview. We'll put it in terms of politics, but then let's bring it back to Bitcoin Cash in particular. Like, in politics, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, politics is a good example, because that's a case where you have a lot of people who basically advocate libertarianism, but then they get upset about the government doing some horrible thing or whatever. And I just think that's an example for me of, like, and you also have people say the Libertarian Party, where they think, like, oh, we should, like, maybe compromise on our principles to become more popular or whatever. And I think that's basically the wrong way to look at it, because, like, if you apply the concepts of economics to government, it's not surprising that they do all these horrible things, because that's basically what their incentives are. Like, they're, you know, so it's like they have the incentive to violate everyone's rights and to do all these sorts of things. So I guess my point is that, like, it's not something to get all upset about. Like you can be upset about it, but it shouldn't be surprising or like that happens. You just be like, okay, this is normal. So then if you want to think about how to change that, you have to change something about the whole setup. Like, you can't just you're kind of like fighting an uphill battle. So that's very frustrating for lots of people. Another example is, like, Roger mentioned something on he was on a podcast recently. Roger Ver mentioned something. He was on this podcast with Isaac Morehouse, who's the Praxis guy. Anyway, basically saying like that the reason the small blockers kind of won the block size debate on BTC was that they like lied, cheated, and stealed, whereas we stuck to our principles, and that's why we lost. And I was thinking that's really like I don't agree with that way of looking at it, because like if your principles aren't pragmatic, if your principles don't work in practice, then it's like not a good, there's something wrong with your principles basically. So I think that's where like if you look at libertarianism, it's basically a set of principles that actually works in practice, you know, like you have reciprocity. Like maybe we can talk about that more later, but if you look at the game theory, like tit for tat strategy in game theory, where you start out being cooperative, and then if someone is like uncooperative with you, like basically aggresses against you, then you respond in kind, basically. So
for sure. I think you hit the nail on the head that it comes down to incentive structures. Yeah. And if we're looking to change systems, so often people fall back on this idea of, well, we have to change human nature. People shouldn't want this thing. And that's just not the way that humans work. We need to figure out what the incentive structures are and then create systems that align with those incentive structures and that align with our goals. Like figure out how to incentivize people and incentivize the work that we want. And so often people just miss that. And perhaps they're too blindly thinking, well, people shouldn't act like that, and they kind of miss the forest for the trees there. So when we bring that back to cryptocurrency, so I mean the freedom that comes with cryptocurrency is that you get all this choice, you know, and if you don't like money, one particular money, you can always fork off and create your own, you know. That is this tool that there's mechanism that's present in cryptocurrency, but there are trade-offs that come with that, because when you're dealing with money, you're dealing with a network, and you need a network effect, and it's this community element that has to be considered, because you can't, like I could just, you know, say, well, Bitcoin Cash, I really don't like what you're doing, I'm going to fork it and call it Naomi Coin, and there'll probably be like maybe one person who's going to use Naomi Coin, and it's probably going to be me, and that's not really money there. So let's talk about this trade-off, and about like kind of blindly saying, well, you know, I have choice, and I don't want to compromise on my principles, and I want exactly what I want, and how that interplays with this economy that we need to create in the crypto ecosystem.
Yeah, well, I think a way of looking at it is basically like there was this good article by Daniel Krawitz years ago about reciprocal altruism, and he basically relates the idea of money to reciprocal altruism, which is, you know, well studied in animals and so on. And basically the point of it, or the takeaway, is that like money enables cooperation. It basically enables reciprocal altruism, which is the same as cooperation, to be spread, you know, over a large number of people. It's a technology that like expands the sphere of being able to cooperate. But if you look at animal populations, there's always people who try to take advantage of the cooperators. So there's always an incentive to basically cheat the system. So I guess I view Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash or any cryptocurrency as like a technology that basically changes the arms race. Like, so it makes it easier to cooperate and easier to detect and get rid of the people who aren't cooperative, or like exclude them basically.
So talk me through the mechanisms of that, because there are the obvious ones, which if someone cheats, then obviously their transactions just aren't accepted. You know, you can't double spend because there's only one transaction that's eventually written into the block, and there are, you know, you need a tremendous amount of hash power in order to trick people and spend something twice. Like there's all of these different interoperating devices, which is what I think makes cryptocurrency so fascinating, this interplay of the technology with the game theories. So talk a little bit about those mechanisms.
Okay. I don't know. I'm going to go back to another idea. Sorry, Sure. I'm going to talk about another book, which is The Sovereign Individual. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
But basically the point of that book is that if you look at the structure of different societies, like, you know, the tribal societies where people are hunter-gatherers, like basically, or versus like agrarian societies and like modern industrial societies, basically the argument the book makes is that the structure of the society politically, like the power structure, is based on the technology and the economics of the system. So basically, like in hunter-gatherer societies, everyone can carry their possessions around, and it's hard to like steal at a large scale. Whereas like with agricultural societies, you can have these kings that can basically, if you can control enough territory, it's pretty easy to like, you know, take everyone's food and store it in a central warehouse, which allows you to have power over other people. Same with like factories, like industrial societies, you have factories and like supply chains and all that kind of stuff. So you end up with like large contiguous nation states because like you can't defend like that infrastructure otherwise. So basically with crypto, because it's like a virtual thing, and with cryptography, it like makes it asymmetrical basically. So you can hide the fact that you have a lot of possessions from people. Like it makes it impossible, like, you know, it basically just changes the economics of how easy it is to steal stuff from people versus how easy it is to keep your stuff from being stolen.
And that's a fascinating dynamic as well that we see in that like that trade-off between, do we store this with a third party? Do we put it in like a crypto bank? It's useful for certain situations, but it also, as you said, it puts a giant target on these institutions. It says we are holding a ton of money. Whereas when you're dealing with individuals, I mean, a person holding their own money, it's very different target mechanism than JP Morgan. Like hackers are targeting JP Morgan all the time because there is a ton of money to steal. But if they're targeting just an individual's bank account, they might have $100. It still requires a lot of resources to hack into someone's account, and you know those incentives just don't match up. It's probably not worth the input. Like it's not worth the down payment, I could say, into all the tools needed to hack when the payoff is just like a few $100s.
But even if you just look at the whole structure of the system, like with a, you know, like you have, it's actually funny because I named this talk, I called it The Strategy of Freedom, which was kind of a play on David Friedman's book, The Machinery of Freedom. But nice. Milton Friedman, who was his dad, basically was talking, he was a libertarian, as I'm sure you know, but he advocated like central banks should have like—
He was a Chicago schoolian, not an Austrian schoolian.
Basically, he had some idea of like how central banks could optimally like issue the money supply. But if you look at it, what I was saying earlier, like what's the incentives? Like obviously if you have the central bank, whoever wants to control money has a central point where they can like, you know, there's like huge incentive to capture that. So
no, you're absolutely right. And I think that's something a lot of people miss is that they say, well, if we create this system, if we create this centralized system, we get rid of friction here and here, and we have these good points here. And they miss that there are trade-offs with everything. Those trade-offs are, you're creating a centralized point of failure. You're creating something that could be captured and corrupted. And that's why so many people dislike the central banks, not because they think, you know, like they don't recognize some of the things that Milton Friedman said. I'm sure a lot of people do recognize and agree with what he said, but they just don't think it's worth it.
Yeah. Well, like, so basically, like if you create a system where it can like has an incentive to capture it, you could say like, well, like it's basically what I was saying before. Like you can complain about what the central bank does, but it's obvious that their incentive is to inflate the currency. So they're never gonna, you know, not do it. Maybe they'll temporarily do it because they have to kind of keep a lid on things or not go too crazy. But so like the point is like, if you have if we try to create systems where it's difficult, and it doesn't even have to be like 100% impossible to do that. Like I think that's maybe a thing where, you know, you can argue what the strategy is between like say BTC and Bitcoin Cash. Or BTC is like, okay, we want it to be like completely impossible for anyone to, you know, it has to be like maximally decentralized, but then you end up not having it in a lot of people's hands and so on. You sacrifice other properties, but you basically want to change the trade-off of how hard it is to capture the thing versus, you know, like how easy it is for other people to use it and benefit from it.
Yeah, for sure. So when we're talking about these, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, nothing. I just think that's kind of where how we have to think about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just going back to incentives within the crypto ecosystems. So, you know, there's a lot of infighting in all crypto camps. It's we've seen it in Bitcoin, we've seen it in Bitcoin Cash, we see it in all communities. There's just kind of, there's all this tension, you know, because as soon as you have the choice of, well, you know, we're finally in control of this, we have to do it absolutely right. People dig their heels in, they think that, you know, it has to be my way. They really start fighting for it. And because it's money, it becomes personal, because it's also a reflection of their wealth at the end of the day, and their savings. And so there can be a lot of angst and animosity and all of this, but it's this very interesting balance with the idea of like, yes, there's animosity and we could split apart, but there are trade-offs there, and people kind of at the back of their mind, they understand those trade-offs and they understand the you know, the damage to ecosystems. So it's like, it's fascinating to kind of watch this play out, because this is an entirely new phenomenon that we're dealing with, this technology, and we're dealing with this game theory, and we're testing these forks in real time and watching how it all plays out. You know, we understand the theory, but to watch it play out in reality can sometimes be very interesting. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk about that balance and that kind of glue that tends to hold communities together despite disagreement within communities.
Well, I mean, again, it probably just comes down to incentives, I guess. Like, there's definitely, you know, I mean, people are motivated in all kinds of different ways, and some people, like, that's why one of the things that I think is important is we want everyone to be able to benefit. Like, you want to, that's like getting back to libertarian principles. The reason it works is because you can, you know, like free markets and so on, you can, by doing things that benefit you, it also benefits society as a whole.
The double thank you phenomenon.
Yeah, whereas if you have some system where you like expect everyone to be self-sacrificing, it basically will never work.
Do you think there's a lot of that in the crypto space? Because I do see a lot of the self-sacrificing nature.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of kind of entitlement, and there's a lot of people who, you know, they're choosing to spend their life focused on this tech and building up this tech because they believe in it, because they think it's so important for society to have free money. But the return at the moment, while it's such a small area of society, you know, the return on investment for them isn't too high. They could probably get a much higher paying job elsewhere. So do you think there is that element of self-sacrificing that maybe we need to actually, you know, reinvestigate?
Well, I mean, I think that it's hard to say. Like, I mean, I think a lot of people are basically want status more than they want to, the goal of, you know, like, so they want to be popular within a community more than they want to actually achieve the goal.
Goes back to our primal needs as human beings.
But like, in terms of self-sacrifice, I mean, I think it's just something where it just doesn't work, basically. So you have to, like, it was actually kind of funny. I don't know if you're probably not as like into all the details of the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem, but
I try to keep up. Probably more than most.
So someone has been running a meme contest the last few days. Read.cash wasn't happy about it. And the guy who runs Read.cash wrote an article about, you know, saying no personal attacks are allowed and I have to ban anyone who does a personal attack. But then he banned himself for doing this post.
I feel like everyone is going to be banned from that site. Like, basically all my articles I post on Read.cash are personal attacks against the government and government members like Bill Barr and Lindsey Graham. So it's like interesting.
It was pretty nice. Like, it was kind of like it was getting to be like, I think it was the best iteration so far of those types of sites. Like, it was sort of like it was nice. It was sort of like Medium, like you could post articles on it and stuff. But I just thought that was sort of funny because it's such a self-defeating thing to do. Like, I think it's sort of crazy. Like, if your moral code requires that you ban yourself from your own platform, there's something wrong there. Like, you have to kind of go back and look at what your principles are, I think.
I think that's a great point.
Space, like, we have like people who, you know, like, we want to have a system where anyone, like, that was basically what was very appealing. One of the things that was very appealing for Bitcoin early on was thinking like, okay, like, I can get rich and also, you know, make the world a better place or whatever. And I think now we've definitely, we've kind of separated those two, where Bitcoin now is more like, okay, let's just all get rich and they kind of forgot about the make the world a better place thing.
Well, in some regards, I mean, I would say, like, most people know I'm pretty coin agnostic, but I would say Bitcoin would focus, it would be more apt to say they focus on holding rather than using it as everyday currency. Or if they do use it as everyday currency, it's only for very large amounts because they're more focused on security. But definitely, like, there's a very different culture that's evolved in Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash, which is very focused on everyday spending. Make this a part of your life, buy your groceries with it, make this a part of your regular ecosystem, so you take power away from the traditional financial infrastructure.
Yeah, totally. And like, so I think basically the Bitcoin Cash community could like focus more on like, okay, let's help people build businesses and, you know, do all these things where like, you know, they can get rich or whatever, or benefit themselves in different ways, you know, and also like that's kind of how we're going to spread it more.
It's a good question. I know we've got a media panel after this that is probably going to be talking about how to spread this more, because it's a very difficult question, and you have to really be in touch with other people's value systems rather than trying to push your own onto other people. I mean, people like you and I, and probably a lot of people watching this chat, they're probably into Austrian economics. They're probably very much interested in the principle of having financial autonomy and financial freedom. A lot of people don't care about that. So it's about kind of tapping into, well, what's their value? What do they hope to achieve? And then figuring out, well, is this a product that can suit them? Probably it is, but we just haven't thought about how to promote it the right way.
I mean, I guess my view on that is you basically just want to like encourage as much experimentation as possible, because you know, there's like, we don't really know exactly what people will want in the future. And you have to have like entrepreneurs and people like that, like try a bunch of things and figure things out. But we want to, you know, we want to like, so for adoption, like there's like, I know Vin Armani, for example, said like, oh, you need like a model where the people get a little, like they get a little piece of the action from each merchant or whatever. So whoever the people are spreading adoption will get a small, you know, you can add an additional output on each transaction, say, so they get a penny or something. Or whatever, maybe that's the model that will work. Like, who knows?
I think it's great.
Maybe it'll be something else. Like, so that's kind of one of the cool things about like crypto in general, but also specifically Bitcoin Cash. Like, that's one of the reasons I think that it's so, like having low fees and allowing different uses is so important compared to, you know, say BTC, where they you know, it makes it harder to experiment, basically. If you have these high fees, you can't just like try a bunch of different things.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also talking about experimentation, because I've also seen this strange interplay where different coins want to differentiate themselves. They want their own culture. They want to say, well, we're the coin that focus on X, Y, Z. But the whole point of having all of these different experimentations across the crypto ecosystem, in my opinion, is so that people can see what works. And hopefully different development teams are looking across the pond and seeing what other people are doing. I know BCH is doing that a lot. I mean, they were looking when Cash Fusion was being developed, they were talking to the CoinJoin people, they were talking to Wasabi, there were, you know, people were signing off, and there was kind of this interplay across aisles of, yes, you've done good here. Or like Avalanche, for example, was developed by Lightning Labs initially. And so I think there is a little bit of that, but I do think there could be more, because, you know, there's lots of different interesting experiments across crypto that perhaps camps would do well to be less insular, and maybe look at what other experiments are going on and learn, and not be afraid to borrow what other people are doing and say, yes, that works, let's integrate it, because, you know, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And on one level, I totally agree with that, but I also think you need to keep in mind like what your core principles are, and like do things that are in line with, like try to maximize those. So like for Bitcoin Cash, we want it to be cash, you want it to be hard money, and you want it to be like cash. So you want it to, so basically all these things like Ethereum, like smart contracts or whatever, like if you can enable that and there's no cost to it, then that's fine. But you don't want to sacrifice the core qualities that you're aiming for.
For sure, it's about understanding what your goals are and understanding the trade-offs if you're to incorporate other things. I do worry though that there is a lot of money still left on the table, so to speak, in that there are things that we could be learning from other camps, that maybe it's tribalism that stops us, maybe it's sort of this inherent desire to, you know, not engage with the other side.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that I'll also argue with you again.
Please do, please.
Like, in terms of having a money, like you want to basically reward the people who are supporting you. So we want to, like the people who hold BCH, we want to try to make the value of their BCH go up as much as possible.
Completely agree. There's no disagreement there.
In that sense, I'm tribal. I'm like, okay, we need to like stick, you know, like make our thing successful. And I think that's.
Oh, no, I agree with you. I think that there is no disagreement there. My point is that there are lots of things that would make us more successful, and that perhaps we are not looking at because there's this tribal nature.
Yeah. I also think like Avalanche, you mentioned Avalanche earlier, which is a good example because that's something where the technology is totally different from Bitcoin, or it has a lot of differences, let's put it that way. And a lot of people say like, oh, this isn't true to Bitcoin, or this doesn't, you know, it violates like the Bitcoinness of what we're doing or whatever. Whereas I think that doesn't, like, you have to step back and say, okay, what are we trying to achieve? What are our core principles? Like, what are the qualities that we want it to have? And if this other thing, you know, helps us achieve that better. So I totally agree that like we should, you know, you have to keep your eyes open. There's lots of stuff going on out there.
Yeah, that's a great point, and yeah, very much highlights that point. So going back to your own particular work in BCH, so how is all of this, you know, philosophical underpinning, how does that affect what you're personally working on right now?
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess it basically just is why I'm here in the first place.
Right.
So like I got into like Bitcoin, and then I was interested in the, like, I got into the block size debate because, you know, I knew that I realized that it had to scale, and I was like, okay, well, I want something that can, like, I don't want it, like gold was interesting early on, but it's not, it's kind of been stuck in its niche for a long time. You want something that can like take over and be, you know, on like take over from the US dollar or whatever eventually.
Gosh. What do you think the chances are? Like, I mean, I debate with this question every day. I just look at the people around me and how uninterested they are in taking power back. And it's not until like a disaster happens like Cyprus that people realize how important it is to control their own money. But I see such an uphill battle. What do you think the chances of us succeeding are and making cryptocurrency and perhaps Bitcoin Cash, you know, a central currency in our ecosystem, in our economy? What do you think the chances of that are? And what do you think the time horizon is?
I mean, it's hard to say what the chances are. I'll channel a Murray here for a second. Say, like,
you have to speak with a French accent.
Like, that's the wrong question. You shouldn't ask like, will this happen? You should say, for this to happen, what do I need? What can I do to make it more likely to happen? So I think that's kind of, I mean, sorry, that's kind of like
no, that's a great answer.
But I mean, I don't think it's hard to know. Like, I think it's probably not that, like, it might be very difficult and an uphill battle, but I think it's likely enough. Like, I think it's possible enough that we should make it happen. Like, that we should try to make it happen. And it's a worthy, you know, it's a difficult challenge, but it's worthy of trying to do. So I think that's something that's worth doing.
No, I agree. And all of my fingers are crossed so that it happens. I try my best to support the wonderful work that you guys are doing, just developing this tech and outreach and letting people know that there are better choices out there. So thank you so much. We've run out of time, unfortunately, on this panel, but Antony, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for chatting today.
Thanks, Naomi.